So I get asked periodically if I still make the terminal release tools, and I do not. So I figured I'd put together this instructional video just so you can maybe figure out how to make them on your own. So there will be some details or some measurements and specifications at the end of the video. So up first, these are the tools that I use. We have a vise, nothing too fancy here, a benchtop vise, a good pair of side cutters, a pair of arc joint pliers and some needle nose pliers. Then there's a 3 or 3.5 millimeter Allen that's used, you see there. And we have a standard file. This is just a standard bastard file, an old rusty hammer, which I have no clue where I found it, but I've used it for years. And then a pair of digital calipers to take measurements with. You can find one at Harbor Freight for $20 or so, and it'll work just fine for this purpose. Another tool that I used was a jig, that wooden board. You don't need to use that, but if you're going to make several sets of these things, then it's useful to have. The metal strips are from the wiper blades off of Passats, Jettas, Golfs, the 2000 to 2005 year models. The factory windshield wipers had these stainless steel strips in there, and I found that they were a perfect material. Some other supplies, we have some different handles. The first set of handles here, this is what I ended up using towards the end when I was making them, and I'll post a link at the end of the video. The others I were using were the ones over here are Stanley picks that they used to sell at Walmart. They now have these types of handles on them, and they don't seem to work as good. I wouldn't recommend them. The last thing is a 14-pin connector that's in the engine bay of Beetles, Jettas, and Golfs. Again, 2000-2005 year models, for example. It was like behind the airbox cleaner, and I used it as a guide to help me see, to check the thickness of the tools as I was making and make sure it fitted properly. And so that was just a good item to use, and if you go to a junkyard, you can find a car with them pretty quickly. So this is the jig that I use. It's just a piece of scrap wood. 23 millimeters from the edge, I hammered in a penny nail. Then 60 millimeters from the penny nail, I made a mark. And then 140 millimeters from the penny nail, I made another mark. So with the jig and a vise, I would measure out and cut strips 140 millimeters long. Obviously you need 2 strips to make a pair, so pretty easy. And when you make your cuts, you want to make sure the cuts are perpendicular. You want the cuts squared off on the material. You don't want them at an angle. It just works out better. Then for each set of tools you'll need 3 spacer strips. So I used cut those approximately 23 millimeters. Again, when you make these cuts, make sure that the cuts are squared off as best you can. So then you take one of your strips and you just want to fold it approximately in half, and then I use the arc joint pliers to kind of squeeze it down. And then I had my 60 millimeter mark, so I'd then just take my side cutters again and just make a cut. Make sure you cut the tips off there, square it off as best you can. So now when you put it in the vise, depending on what size you're making, you'll have the tip sticking out so far. I use the dial calipers and I would dial them in to the length that I needed. So this one, I believe I'm making the junior, so I'd get it at approximately 13 millimeters, or as close as I could to 13 millimeters, and lock it down. And then I would use that to help me get the height set up, the length sticking out of the vise. Again, everything, it's important that you make sure you keep things squared up as best you can. Once you got it where you want it, then just tighten the vise down, and then comes the fun part. The filing. Holy crap, the filing. When you file, make sure you keep things squared up. Work on both sides a little bit at a time. Notice how I'm kind of walking the file around the edges, or kind of making a bit of a curve as I go. You want to kind of keep the edges rounded off a little bit. So just keep filing, keep filing, keep filing. And along with the filing, you periodically need to check and make sure that you're keeping the widths of the tips parallel. You have to be careful when you're filing. It's easy to put too much pressure on the bottom edge, for example, and start tapering them in, and you don't want to do that. So file a little bit, then just take your caliper tool and check your specs and make sure where they need to be, that you don't overshoot your target or you're not making them uneven. Like I said, just work a little bit at a time, make some measurements, work a little more, make some more measurements. So after you have the width of the tool set correctly, then you have to thin the blades down a little bit. So you have to start thinning them down. When you do this, the junior size ones, it doesn't take a whole lot. That material is just slightly too thick to begin with, so it doesn't take a whole lot to thin them down. But to get the micro size ones, you have to remove a fair amount of material. And you have to be careful because the material is getting really thin, and the file I'm using, it's a Craftsman file, which has a little bit of aggressive cut on it. You have to be careful because it can sometimes snag, and you'll be getting it about where you need it to be, and it would just snag the finger and bend it, and when it does that, it just weakens the material too much. It's not to be trusted, and you just have to throw it away. Now, one thing when you think you have about thin enough, as you're filing back and forth, start walking the bottom of the file away from it so the top of the file creates a knife edge or a point on the end of the tip. Once you think you have your thickness about set correctly, then I would use that T14 tool, and that's how I'd size up. I'd just see if I could fit it into the slots, and it should fit snug, but once you get it in there, you should be able to pull it out without much effort. In many cases, you'll find that you will need to fine-tune them, so just carefully go over them until you get them to the correct thickness that's needed. It just takes a little bit of time and effort to do it right. So here's a set of blanks filed down to size, ready to go. To get them into the handles, I took a pick and just filed the flanges off where it went onto the handle. Hang the blank over it, take your handle and put it on top, and just hold it as straight as you can, and then just tap it on there with a hammer, just a few taps, and then pull it off. And you'll see it can be kind of tight. Now, these are the new, that right there is the new pick handles that they sell at Walmart for the Stanley, and they were tight. If you use those, you're probably going to have to drill the hole out just a little bit. I fitted 3 of the spacer strips between the fingers, got the 3mm Allen in the vise, and use the hammer. Hammer the handle down until it covers up the spacer strips. From here, I would use the needle nose pliers to adjust on the fingers to make sure that they're even and parallel with each other. On the junior size tools, I would just put a slight bend on the very tips of the juniors, and I only did this to the juniors. Again, just use your needle nose pliers to make them, tweak them as you needed, get the spacing of the fingers where you need them, and just where you can get them into that T14 pin connector without much hassle. So there's the end product, the set of tools that I made, and here's the junior tool being used to remove a terminal from a housing. Here are the specs as you need, and the website that I was getting the handles that I used later on when I was towards the end when I was making them, those little mini file handles. The website has them as of when I make this video. Whether or not they have them a year from now is debatable, but any cheap pick tool will probably work. Like I said, the current ones they're using, the Stanley pick tools that they're using now, the hole is too small. I tried using it, and it was a nightmare when I put the three spacer blades to get it hammered on there. I about couldn't get it off of the Allen at that point. So if you were to use those, like I said, you'd probably have to drill the hole out just a little bit. If you can find the old Stanley pick types, like I used to use, that's great. But that's it. So now you know the basics. It may take you a few tries to get some made correctly, but your supply costs are relatively cheap. Enjoy. I sell the OEM butt connectors, the same as you get at the dealer, but at a fraction of the price. If you need to purchase some, please visit my website, 4130-products.com/crimp.